Good. So, hi everyone and welcome. I'm Thibauld. I'm co-founder at ImpactLabs. Welcome to our webinar. So we are an impact pure player consultancy, and we have a team of great people with a passion for nature that are based in Lisbon, Paris, and Cologne. So what's the plan for the next hour? We will be taking 5 minutes at the beginning to introduce our topic, talk about the potential role of nature tech in the two divides, the behavioral divide and the nature of finance divide. And then I will also say a word about the paradox of associating nature and technology. And then it will be a discussion with our guests, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions, of course. And to ask the questions, you need to find the button at the bottom right of your screen, which looks like a PlayStation symbols, and enter the Q&A. So, who are our guests today? We are very happy to welcome Gilad, Executive Director at NTC, Marianne, Head of Sustainable Finance at Axa, Simas, founder of Bloom Labs, and Steffen, Global Director of Sustainability Advisory at Salesforce. And I have the pleasure to host this mission with Vincent, my partner in crime at ImpactLabs.earth.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you for being here today. As we embark on a discussion that is both timely and essential, technology as a catalyst for a nature-positive transition. So it is timely and essential because, as you know, we are facing a polycrisis that partially materializes in the 6 planetary boundaries that we have already crossed. And the environmental and ecological transition that we need is the journey to bring back those boundaries to a safe space. And to do so, we need to avoid creating additional negative impact. We need to reduce our footprint to the bone, and we need to contribute by creating positive impact on the nature. We need nature positive strategies. So, and especially as it is not really going in the right direction. Huh? So we are just starting to understand the consequences of feedback loops, tipping points, and how the different boundaries interact with each other and how all of this is accelerating. And what we see in the media reflects the reality of the situation. It reflects, the reality of the frequency of extreme climate events. And I mean, today in Europe, we're facing on the one side fires, and on the other side, so flooding. So those extreme climate events, they are all over the place in the media, and this is sort of overwhelming. So we feel paralyzed. We feel like change is not really in our hands, and it needs to happen at another scale, like governments, for example, or large companies. And the problem is the large corps, they are facing growing challenges to reach the targets they had set. And overall, the signals that they're sent, they're pretty bad lately. So, I mean, what we all should be doing, knowing all of this, is just one thing. Try to act to solve this crisis, as nothing else really matters, right? But we don't. And that's our first divide. That's the behavioral divide. Because we are stuck at the beginning of the change curve. This is the Kubler-Ross grief model that describes the different phases we are going through when facing a grief. And it can be applied to any big change that impacts our lives. So it's starting with denial, then anger or fear, then trying to bargain, to minimize or reinterpret, moving to a depression phase before we can get to acceptance and then action. For the adept of the change theories, it's a very similar model that is used by Otto Scharmer in his book, The U Theory. So we are sort of stuck on the way. We need new narratives, and this is exactly what nature tech is doing. It brings a positive mindset. It's a call for action, and it replaces nature at the heart of positive effort. So nature tech can be a very important engine for a bigger change. And it goes beyond its actual direct impact, which is already quite large. As you know, the IPCC says it's up to 30% of the mitigation effort that we need to reach the Paris Agreement that can come from technology. But for this, we need the right funding. And this is the second big divide we are discussing today. We keep on investing 35 times more to sponsor our own extension than on protecting and restoring nature. So last week, the president of the EU Commission called for nature credit markets. I'm sure you've seen that. But how do we get there? How do we accelerate funding overall? What are the key barriers, and how can we learn from previous experiences like the voluntary carbon market, for example? Because we really need that shift, and we need to happen as soon as possible. And nature tech can benefit from it. But some would still say, when it comes to nature tech, they see an opposition, they see a paradox, an oxymoron, if you want, where we see a potential powerful alliance. And of course, we're not naive. And of course, technology, on the one hand, is just as good as the use you're making out of it. But we also believe that nature can inspire technology, as it already has in multiple instances, and that technology can be leveraged for nature when it's made for good. Mm. And because we believe nature and technology are compatible and they can work hand in hand, because we believe nature tech can be a powerful engine for change, we focus a lot of time on those nature technologies at ImpactLabs. So that's why we built a tech radar with 500 plus solutions. That's why we work with NTC on a taxonomy for nature tech. That's why we're here today. That's also one of the key purposes of the Nature Tech Collective. And they will be talking about what they do way better than I would. So I think Gilad can explain that. And Vincent, I'm going to now hand over to you to get started our discussion with our guests.
Yes, thank you, Thibauld. So I'm Vincent. I'm also co-founder of ImpactLabs. And what I will do is to introduce with one round of questions this wonderful panel, all people very involved into nature positivity. And after we'll enter a panel discussion, at the end, a Q&A with the audience. So don't hesitate already to put your question into the little PlayStation sign, bottom right of the screen, and we'll be picking up some questions. So I'll start with you, Gilad. You're the executive director of NTC Nature Tech Collective, which proposes to promote this whole ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what NTC does?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. In case you were wondering, the name is Gilad. It's a bit of a difficult one, and I'm really grateful ImpactLabs for letting us share a bit on what we're doing. And I'm also really stoked to see some of our members here. See Biometrios in town. I'd love to see Space for Good. Obviously, Simas and Bloom Labs. So Nature Tech Collective was established really upon a shared understanding that much of what we like to call the environmental impact industrial complex is built on faulty foundations of data. It is in fact true that we don't really have a full and accurate state of nature. We don't have that profile. And so how are we expected to actually build mechanisms for de-risking investments, mechanisms for investment at scale, if we can't even get the data under consensus? And so that's what we're about at Nature Tech Collective. We are first and foremost here to build this new category that is known as nature tech. Quickly to define that, it's the same technology you'll find at climate, defense industry, ag tech. The unique differentiator is the lens that we as a collective take, and that is on a transition towards a nature positive economy. And so we start by having this community, a growing community of 160 plus members at this point, many of which are nature tech solution providers, but also a growing cohort of the other stakeholders in this ecosystem. Project developers, big corporates, enterprise-level NGOs, academics, experts. And the role here is, can we accelerate the adoption of nature tech from the private sector and the public sector? So in the community side of things, we have a lot of conversations on our Slack thread, a lot of educational webinars. Really, we get people on stages, get them into reports, amplify their work and their message. And then outside of that, with amazing partners like Thibauld, Vincent, and the ImpactLabs, we create a lot of assets for educational purposes, right? Because a lot of the corporates that we talk to are still at maybe they're at the awareness level. They saw the planetary boundaries. They realize the world is, there's more stress on the other boundaries beyond carbon. Now what? And so assets like the taxonomy, the Nature Tech report that's coming out of COP16, a bunch of the other stuff that we're doing allows them to understand, okay, this is what I do. And then the next step with Paula, who's around here, and Amalia and the rest of my team, then it's about matchmaking. So we bring in, the #3 paper and pulp company in the world or the biggest agro bank, and then we connect them with the solutions or the partners who implement such solutions. That's what we're about. In an ideal world, we don't exist. We could go surfing. But since we're still in this nascent stage of the sector, we're here to matchmake and be allies to you. Stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Gilad. A very clear introduction. So as we understand, Nature Tech is really to serve adoption of nature strategies, which goes with many different challenges, from corporate frameworks to technology to measure and overall adoption. So I'm pleased to turn the mic to Marianne, who is part of Axa Climate. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing and specifically around nature strategies.
All right. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with you and surrounded by great speakers today. So Axa Climate, to give you a bit of background, so we are 250 people globally. We are a subsidiary of Axa, of course, but we're a bit like a startup within the big group. We support corporates and investors in assessing climate and biodiversity risks with consulting and training services, parametric insurance. And we developed 2 years ago a SaaS platform called Altitude, like for corporates, for investors, but for example, Altitude Finance, they are private equity firms and infrastructure funds to screen their climate risk and biodiversity risk, prior investment and post investments, which is good because at the beginning, people come to us with the need of climate hazard, physical risk, and then they see on the platform there's a new module about biodiversity and that help people to start their journey. We try to address double materiality, so how my investments in the company, the portfolio company, is dependent to ecosystem services, but also what is the impact on biodiversity, where are located my assets close to sensitive biodiversity areas or threatened species, or my biodiversity impact. So it's a start because as Thibauld and Gilad say, it's a new journey. It can be a bit cumbersome to start with biodiversity. So at least with biodiversity and nature, if you try to understand what's going on, it's the first step. My role of the panel is to bring you a few acronyms and regulatory frameworks. So I apologize for that. There will be more fun with the other speakers. But as we saw for climate, sometimes when it becomes mandatory, where there's frameworks, it starts to get the market in motion and our business model and budget associated, and people try to understand. Have you seen during the last few decades, biodiversity has taken a backseat to climate issues. And when you look at the planetary boundaries, biodiversity is the state of biodiversity is way scarier than climate. It was very difficult in the past to assess and evaluate the loss of biodiversity, and the IPBES in 2019, they start to release their 5 drivers to assess biodiversity. And that's where, the COP15 in December 2022 was the first COP on biodiversity, where you actually start to take commitments and targets. So the famous Koenig-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has been very instrumental in setting the strategic direction for biodiversity. These targets are no net loss by 2030, net gain from 2030, and full recovery by 2050. As you can see, it's very ambitious, coming from where we are today. But at least we've got targets. At least we start understanding is the 2 degrees for climate. Now we start to know how to assess. So we need to have what are the biodiversity plan to reduce biodiversity loss and start restoring biodiversity. You can see in Europe, there has been the first continent to put strategic objective as well, to put biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030, the famous EU's biodiversity strategy for 2030. And everybody has heard about CSRD. I won't talk about too much about CSRD today, but clearly that's the first mandatory regulatory reporting, including biodiversity. It's very ambitious as, when you look into details, but at least corporates and investors start to understand, how to proceed, to understand a little bit more what's going on. And it's a real opportunity to have this ESRS E4 about how to build a solid biodiversity pathway in line with respecting planetary boundaries related to biosphere integrity and land change, the vision of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and their targets and goals, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, and really helps corporates to understand how to adapt my business model in line with, biodiversity preservation. So it's the first step. It's the first mandatory regulatory framework when you talk about biodiversity with concrete rules. And when you look into it, clearly you will need tech and data, because to locate the assets at scale, you need a tool, you need a map, you need to start to have visualization, and you need to have a lot of information to compile in one way if you want to evaluate and assess your impact on biodiversity across your full value chain. You will need data, you will need technology. So clearly, when you talk about biodiversity, it's about climate change. You have GHG emissions, you have pollution, you have water. So people can be a bit scared at the beginning. I don't know if you've seen there's been a survey released by PwC before the summer about how do you feel about the different KPIs required by the CSRD? And people say for climate change, 94%, I'm okay. For the workforce, 96%. But biodiversity is the lowest one, only 62%, because people are I don't know where to start. The first time I need to report on biodiversity. So you see that it's going to be a long journey. A lot of education will be required. I agree with Gilad, I need biodiversity training with all the stakeholders will be needed. But clearly tech's going to be needed. And here, happy to have questions after.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So yes, tech is needed. And actually, we've seen recently many tech giants making big announcements. Some were not so positive because some of those players have been delisted from SBTi because not meeting the climate target, but at the same time investing even more into very ambitious climate sequestration project, and also investing into nature. And out of all of those players, I think Salesforce is a super interesting player because they had a very long journey with a particular approach, developing very early stage their own tech, which is now available for many other corporations. So I'm pleased to introduce Steffen, who is the Global Director of Sustainability Advisory at tech giant Salesforce.com. And I'll let you introduce yourself and explain you a little bit how Salesforce is helping this game.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's a very long title for a very simple job, which is bridging our own corporate sustainability team with our technology teams, basically. That's what I do. I work with our customers around the world on how they can actually use our technology to implement sustainability use cases, from circularity over carbon accounting, and then embed all of that in their business processes. So that includes nature. Question is about why nature? Why does Salesforce care about nature at all? I think we're all on board with a very simple, crisp message: no nature, no party, right? We all know that we are part of nature. We all know we have an impact on nature. We all know that we rely on nature's functional ecosystem services. Otherwise, there would be no economy. There would be no Salesforce. A very simple example in tech: you have a piece of software like Salesforce, an application that runs on a server that sits in a data center. The data center is cooled by water, right? No water, no data center, no application, no Salesforce for 200,000 customers. That's a very, very simple chronic risk that's very easy to get, right? In the past years, and the past decades, I should say, we aim to make nature, not only climate, but nature, a part of both our boardroom discussions and our engine room discussions. So what I mean about that, I mean that our Chief Impact Officer, that's Susanne Bianca, she reports directly to our CEO. Right, so she brings sustainability, meaning people, climate, nature, into those boardroom discussions as a standing agenda item. That's huge, right? And from that, we developed over the past years, I think it was in 21, we embedded sustainability as one of our core values in the company. Like not just a post on the wall, because that's a huge milestone, because our core company values that drive our investment decisions, they drive our stakeholder engagement, they drive our employee engagement. And one of those results was that we got the backing to form a really powerful climate action plan back in 21. So a lot of pillars in it. One of those pillars was ecosystem restoration, restoring ecosystem as a natural carbon sink. We hired talent from the field, from UNEP, from scientific institutions, from NGOs, people who understand nature, right, to help us operationalize that strategy and really build programs that make a dent. And the more we've been diving into the nature aspect of the climate strategy, we found that of course that's bigger than just being a sub item to climate, right? Nature through the lens of biodiversity, as halting biodiversity loss, driving biodiversity, that become so big that we made an own nature positive strategy in 2023, I guess we launched it. And that again has three different angles. The first angle is we need to understand and measure and manage our own impact on nature. That led to us becoming part of the TNFD pilot, diving deep into what biodiversity means in terms of the CSRD reporting requirements. The second pillar was how can we also help investing more and channeling funds into nature positive solutions. That's a realm that we've been investing in for many years before, but also we want to move the industry into that direction a little bit. So how can we do that with policies, with our convening power, you know? And the third one was how can we also build software, which is pretty much our superpower, to help others moving in the same direction. And that leads me to the engine room, basically, because sustainability has become a core design principle for building software here at Salesforce. One very tangible example was like CSRD or sustainability management and ESG disclosures, right? We've been reporting on ESG for the past 13 years voluntarily. Now, of course, professionalizing it more and more with CSRD and CSDDD and everything coming down on us. I mean that in a positive notion, basically. And even 5 to 6 years ago, we were still juggling with spreadsheets, right, to do our carbon accounting, like everyone else here, right? And like I would say, no sustainability manager ever on this planet entered this space for his or her love to carbon accounting. Right? So we saw like, what isn't there a simpler way to make this, like to automate this stuff, to make that more tangible, to include all the different departments like finance, operations, ESG, and we built our own application back in the day. Like Salesforce in a nutshell is about integrating data from outside, harmonize it, making it actionable, understandable, and basically use that to drive decisions. Once we did it, thanks to the backing of the bull, right, we were able to slash down the time it took to do our carbon accounting. But then again, we saw like, what if we would productize it and bring it out to the market? And then what happened 5 years ago? What's interesting is like, our own corporate sustainability department is still our biggest critic for this application, because they're using that application to do our own sustainability management and disclosures. And that is also what I would like to give out as an advice and maybe as a plea to our tech industry: eat your own dog food, right? The application that you build, use it yourself, because we are right now, to be a bit critic, we are in an era where it's like in marketing tech 10 years, 12 years ago, where it's like not only nature tech, but climate tech solutions pop up every other week, right? And companies feel overwhelmed by it. So we need to be very clear on what is the value that we bring to the table as a tech provider, and also deliver some form of proof. So use your own stuff, right? And that is what I'm actually here to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Steffen. Very insightful. I guess it's a great introduction to the future panel discussions to come. So a lot of this movement is about financing and funding, right? And so I'd like now to introduce Simas, the founder of Bloom Labs, to tell a little bit about the state of nature finance, and also what we could learn from the voluntary carbon market that could suffer from a few defects, including transparency and lack of data and lack of precise modeling. So as we get into biodiversity and nature strategies, what can we learn from that? And so where are we today and where are we going?
Thank you so much, Vincent, and happy to see everyone here. Yeah, so I will quickly speak about the small insignificant part of the nature tech movement, which is how are they expected to make money and how connected it is to environmental markets, which is my specialty, particularly biodiversity credits. So from my side, I would categorize the ways nature tech companies earn revenue these days in three big categories. One is direct B2B contracts, whether that's data monitoring solution, SaaS, data platform, ESG management platform, you name it. These are direct connections that nature tech companies have with corporates who are expected to be the main users of such technologies, and that's the gold standard when it comes to earning revenue. However, a lot of times you will need to have intermediary ways to fund that nature tech work, which I will talk about in a second. Another category I would add is governmental contracts, and that's something that Environmental Policy Innovation Center will chat about next week at NTC webinar. So if you're there, if you can, definitely join it. And then the third way, which is, like I said, the field where I spend most of my time, is environmental credits. A lot of nature tech companies are relying to earn their revenue to become successful businesses by participating in environmental markets, whether that's carbon credits, biodiversity, water, nutrient credits, you name it. I will speak about biodiversity credits now because it's my specialty, and B, it's the largest subset of nature and hence nature tech, and they're deeply both areas, nature tech and biodiversity credit markets, are, I would say, tied at the hip. They both started growing in unison, and they're both very, very much interconnected. To prove my point, imagine a typical project developer, for example, restoring rainforests in the Amazon. Let's imagine that project developer decides to use biodiversity credits as the main funding mechanism for their work. For that, they'll need to collect a lot of biodiversity data and work with it, and probably for that they'll need a specialized provider to make that happen, which would be a nature tech company. If all goes well, data is collected, restoration work is done. They would issue and sell these credits probably to corporates and fund their work that way. And obviously, then it trickles down to nature tech companies as well. And you can think of dozens of different ways how such restoration preservation work is funded by biodiversity credits, and hence, nature tech companies are directly reliant on the revenue stream coming from these credits as well. And yeah, to give a quick introduction to biodiversity credits, it's super early. It's let's say a brainchild in a way, I would say, of carbon markets with some big differences. It is moving super fast, has a big policy push, especially after Global Biodiversity Framework 2 years ago, and there's a lot of innovation happening right now, partially enabled as well by communities such as Nature Tech Collective, and the innovation speed is super fast in comparison to traditional conservation field. Stuff that used to happen in years or decades is happening in months these days. But at the same time, because it's a financial market-based mechanism, it offers both big rewards but also big risks, and it needs to be done right. So this is a very much a tool that everybody's excited about, but it offers both risks and rewards. And yeah. Nature tech community, nature tech companies provide the infrastructure to streamline that biodiversity credit-based funding. Hence, it's directly, like I said, tied at the hip. I don't think that if anyone has any questions, comparing biodiversity markets to carbon markets, happy to answer. But I think I'm out of time now, and yeah, looking forward to the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Simas. And I think we're actually perfectly sharp on time to enter the panel discussion. So I'd like to start with the first provocative question. Thibauld did show us at the beginning that there is some kind of regression on climate strategies, people missing their target. And Marianne also explained that biodiversity is probably the most overwhelming topic. So isn't it too early actually to push for nature strategies when we're not meeting just the climate target? So I don't know who wants to answer that first question.
Well, maybe I can start just saying, like, when you talk to corporates, people say I'm already like a lot of work on overwhelmed with like climate strategy and how to reduce my GHG emissions and decarbonization, etc. And now I have to address biodiversity on top of that. When you look at the different drivers of, biodiversity loss, climate change is one of them. And, if you're already addressing climate change, you're addressing already biodiversity. I think people think that, you have to start from crash on biodiversity, but policy around like water consumption, pollution, etc. always been like discussed within corporates before. Just like now it's included in like more global overview on how to address nature and biodiversity. And if you above 1.5 degrees increase of temperature, that extreme weathers and ecosystem collapse will grow significantly. So anyway, we need to think about how to restore that. There was the IPCC who said that nature-based solution can provide over 30% of the global mitigation required to stabilize global warming below 2 degrees. So nature and climate are the two faces of the same coin. Like we need to address both at the same time. Need to make sure that like what we implement for climate change doesn't hurt biodiversity. For a long time, like people were saying, like, yeah, we will remove forests to put like solar panels. But it doesn't really work like that. You have to think about both ways and how to restore nature-based solution. They can address climate change, like improve resilience of ecosystems. Like if you have healthy mangroves, you can reduce a lot like flooding risk. If you restore the coastal coast, you can prevent sea level rise, etc. So there's a lot of initiatives that can already put in place. And restoring biodiversity is not only philanthropic. Like we are at a company seminar in Cognac in the south of France, discussing a lot of people with vineyards and saying like, when we work on biodiversity, it's not just because we want to, preserve nature and the little worms. It's just because it improved our economic capacity, will improve the resilience of our vineyards. And like from an economic point of view, it makes sense. So it's just people need to really understand like climate and biodiversity and nature need to be tackled at the same time. And it's not a new topic. It's just like putting everything that already been done can improve the first strategy plan. And in fact, for climate, it was the same. Like 10 years ago, nothing was perfect. We didn't know how to calculate the scope 3. Nobody has ever heard about the value division, etc. And people already started to think about climate change. So biodiversity is the same. Nothing is perfect today. We're missing some data, okay, but we can already try to understand where we're at and how to improve our understanding of where we're at and how to improve the business model. So just saying, like, don't think completely overwhelmed. There's already a lot of things available, and it's just like start, and then you will improve what you do.
Yeah, and in the end, we should remind that 60% of world GDP is directly depending on nature. So even if from a tech company, it might seem a bit far, nature, as Steffen explained, actually, it's still at the source of almost any business. So getting into the second question for this panel is, how do you measure nature impact? And maybe explaining why it's actually much harder than tracking greenhouse gas emissions. So I guess several of you guys could answer that question, but I don't know who wants to give it a first shot.
Yeah, I'm happy to dig in first and try my best. So I think first of all, carbon emissions is something that can be put into a single unit. and is global and globally accepted. So that simplifies a lot of measurement related challenges. And nature biodiversity more specifically is by definition complex and is defined by the relationships between each other, and it cannot be put into a number easily, if ever. It's still an ongoing discussion, right? But right now we're seeing so many different ways to measure nature. There's still no one accepted method, and until we get to some sort of standardized notion of how to measure nature, ecosystem condition at the moment is becoming the concept that most stakeholders, both from the corporate side, both from the, let's say, on the ground project development side, governmental side, are converging around, but it's still not operationalized to the point where it can be commonly accepted. So it just makes everything challenging. Reporting on it, doing restoration and preservation projects, and kind of quantifying biodiversity gain. How do you do that? There's a million ways to do that. And let's see, from my experience, I've done a deep dive of every single biodiversity credit scheme in the market and looking into the metrics that they use to quantify biodiversity gain. You have at least 130 different metrics and growing. And some align, some don't. Some have very different theories of change on how biodiversity gain should be quantified. So these are multiple challenges around how the complexity of ecosystems that is very difficult to resolve, and make it as easy as carbon emissions. But at the same time, it's also more connected to the ground level, let's say, resources, nature risk, something that Gilad's colleague Raviv Turner would really promote, is something that is more directly threatening to the corporates, for example, than GHG emissions, and can be used then to push this nature agenda as well, to build out the dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities of nature into corporate strategies.
And I think we're moving a lot from like carbon compensation schemes into nature positive contribution, and this is also different thinking. Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a very tough topic, because compensation, offsetting, whatever you want to call it, it's you're directly comparing the negative damage you've done, let's say the emissions you've caused, to then the positive activities you've financed, let's say. This concept is easier to grasp and accept for carbon, because you're talking about molecules and not, let's say, land specifically. For nature, you're talking about land and very specific. You're talking about life as well. You're talking about different species, and the trying to put this into perspective of offsetting, compensating, etc., has deep moral, philosophical, ethical questions that many folks are not comfortable with. Hence, the nature positive, contributory approach was born, where basically the idea is that if you are a buyer of, for example, biodiversity credits, you don't in any way connect your damages done as a company to then the positive impact you've caused by financing such solutions. If you ask me if that's realistic, I have my questions on it. If you really dive deeper, it's very difficult to then systematically, voluntarily make corporates, put big amounts of money towards nature restoration and preservation. Hence, you have policy push happening as well at the governmental level, and that's probably what is required to really value nature at the at the private sector level. But I'll stop here. There's a lot to unpack.
Okay, thank you. So we touched already quite a few topics that could explain the current low nature strategy adoption, from very complex metrics to emerging frameworks, emerging technology. But isn't it something deeper that is maybe blocking such adoption, like just consciousness? I don't know who wants to take that one.
But if I may, because that's like tying into what you just said, Simas. Somewhere I read the great quote that you can't offset killing a panda by revetting marshland. And I think that is what's about the consciousness of what nature is, what biodiversity is, and what it means to you. And when I think about like the Salesforce journey that I depicted when I kicked it off, I think the single most important factor to adopting frameworks, to adopting or to accepting and committing to measuring, trying to measure your impact on nature, comes with expertise from the field. Because like us, we're a software company, right? So inherently we didn't have any nature experts. Now we have many of them, a spectacular team that also changes the way how we think about building software, the think about how we operate. They also have a sense of certain gravity, right? They are like that interesting strangers in a software company where people go to and ask them about what they do and how we can reduce our impact on nature, understand it in the first place. And I think that is what companies could and should do as well, like finding that expertise outside of the bubble, bringing it in, and see and trigger systemic changes from within the company. And we've experienced that. Let me give an example. We experienced that 10 years ago with digital transformation. When we called digital back then IT. You know, IT was those folks like working in those data centers, like with those nerdy guys, and nobody talked to them ever until somebody let them out of the data center at some point in time and actually listened to what they had to say and the experience and the skills they had, and discovered, you know, there's a huge benefit for running our business. And it's the same, like it's a similar notion right now with nature and sustainability experts broadly, where right now we bury them under carbon accounting and number crunching stuff, where the real benefit that could actually contribute to a company is understanding the company's contribution to nature, to climate, in a positive and in a bad way, and determine strategies on how to mitigate it, or actually how to turn it around. And last sentence on that, maybe also reframing on the strategy side. I don't think there is something like a nature strategy or a sustainability strategy. I only think there is a sustainable business strategy, and it has to be part of it. Because I think, as we heard before, sustainability performance, as in people performance, as in climate performance, as in nature performance, will be a proxy for future business performance as a whole, right? Mm. And I think that's very crucial, and therefore we need that new expertise, we need that new talent, we need that new insight to get it in the company and also change the company from within. It's a push and it's a pull.
Yeah, completely agree with you. You need to be part of a business strategy, and part of our practice actually is a lot to help companies define an impact business model. Right, so you have business into between impact and the way the company function, and this is absolutely core. Otherwise, it's just reporting. So another question, Thibauld in his introduction mentioned about this paradox and the classic opposition of nature and technology from the 16th century with Da Vinci, Rabelais. It was kind of it does not go together. And we all believe around this table, virtual table, that actually it goes together. It might be the biggest opportunity to accelerate the movement. So maybe we could just pick one example about AI, which is a super hot topic right now. We saw that AI, especially Gen AI, is pushing out some of the big tech companies outside of their climate strategy. But at the same time, we see that it's a huge opportunity with many cases to actually support nature positivity. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yep, if I may, because that's very close to home. Like Salesforce is one of those Gen AI providers as well, companies that built Gen AI services and autonomous agent services and these kind of things on our platform. And I want to tie that into what I said in the beginning when I mentioned sustainability as a core value and how it influences product development. And that's actually a perfect example, because from that core company value, sustainability, it actually found its way into being one of our 5 product development principles. So when we build generative AI services for, say, service, marketing, commerce, ESG, then it has to adhere to sustainability operators, if you will. So that means in the case of AI, The AI that we build ourselves, the large language models, need to be open source. The code needs to be there so that that companies that would adopt that LLM would need to retrain the model, because this would drive another energy consumption. This would drive another emissions. Disclosing energy consumption is important. Selecting the right model size for your AI, not becoming too technical, but you can have a generative AI that knows everything that has ever been published on the internet. It could like tell you how to build code. It could tell you how to reduce your reductions, and it could quote like a Shakespeare sonnet. You don't need this, right? You need a very narrow AI that's excellent. It goes very deep into a single task, the task you want to perform. And by having not a broad AI, but a narrow AI, you're cut down significantly on the training effort, significantly on the energy, significantly on the emissions. And that is like just one example on how you can make AI, let's say, more efficient. I wouldn't say more sustainable, but at least more efficient. And the other way would be how to use AI for nature, for sustainability. There's immense pool of great use cases that keeps popping up. They really use AI to build great forecasts on or let's say deforestation detection, for example, from satellite imagery. There's great stuff out there.
Yes.
Can I just add a little perspective and maybe a bit of a heterodox view? So there's the question of what's AI good for? And in theory, there's a lot of great use cases for AI in nature. The core problem that we're facing in nature is like blockchain and many other technologies, we're in a garbage in, garbage out situation. So the AI is only as good as the data you're going to get. And it's the hardest thing to get investment into is actual data collection, data sharing. There's a lot of data out there that isn't being shared because it's siloed away by the private sector. This is not even a tech problem as much as, we're the Nature Tech Collective. We want to talk about tech solution. It is 100% a human problem, a coordination problem. So like the position that we take, and we're all for it. We're working on a really exciting AI project with ImpactLabs. But the position we're trying to take is, well, first we got to solve for how do we actually have enough ground truthing? How do we actually have enough of an understanding of the state of nature as it comes from the ground or from the water? Because remote sensing is not going to do it. How are we going to actually get local communities to do the collection of the data, the maintenance of the data ongoing? And then, by the way, this is how they also get paid to be part of the system. Those are the issues that we as a collective are trying to get to the point where we can really address. And it's amazing to have organizations like Salesforce, who launched the Nature Tech Alliance, and other really big companies that are increasingly getting involved in these much trickier, more human problems. Just want to add that.
Yeah, no, but there's a belief that, and actually there's some proof that it's really working. We've been involved in many remote sensing projects, both on carbon sequestration by forest, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, going into biodiversity, and this is really helping progress. So there's some proof that it's working. Maybe conscious of time, Thibauld, I should just one last question because we should have time for the Q&A. Maybe the last one I'd like to ask is, again, about the funding and directing to those emerging startups, because we still see, we do a lot of deal flow for some funds, and we still do a lot of 70% roughly of the investment going towards energy optimization, and I would say climate technology and hardware like direct air capture. So how do we make sure that the investors also understand the opportunity to go into more nature tech and nature-based solutions?
Yeah, really quick on that note. I think the underlying theme of everything we've been discussing that really should be named is incentives. It's all about aligning incentives. Every member of this panel has kind of been cluing into that as well. So this is nothing new. The reason there's more money going into DACs and other kind of like tech-enabled carbon capture is because enough organizations were burnt by certain media outlets for putting trust into nature-based solutions where we don't have absolute accuracy. And that has led to a lot of flashback, and then just generally there's a lot of flashback on ESG. So there's this new notion of green hushing, where even companies that are doing something aren't talking about it. The way to drive more funding into nature-based solution, into nature tech, is to make it clear that this is not a nice to have, and that is directly aligned with the bottom line of the company or the investor sees enough of the opportunity, the upside for it. Two things to make that happen. Number one, you look at things like biodiversity credits as sort of, the cherry on top, right? So for big investors that are going to nature-based solutions, they should be getting a capital stack of opportunities, right? We're talking about the agriculture part. We're talking about possibly ecotourism, other things. And by the way, there's also potential of biodiversity credits. When we're talking about things related to soil and water, I mean, it depends on the sector, but mining has, taxes, and mining has laws that are gonna put it out of business unless they do something. That's the stick. The carrot is there's opportunities to improve yields. There's opportunities to create new business units. So nature tech needs to be in service of direct bottom lines that happen to also help nature for now. And eventually we could get to the point where we're in a better world and it's just about nature itself. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Gilad.
And Vincent, if
Yes.
just maybe 1 minute, if talking to a lot of investors, I think there's some eager people are interested in investing, they are launching new funds with biodiversity thematic, and they clearly want to identify targets. I think it's a chicken and egg question as well. The question for NatureTech is there a business model? Will people buy the product at the end of the day? And so the new regulatory frameworks, the biodiversity credit, they will create this market. And when investors are convinced that, there's a business opportunity because they will scale, they will redirect more and more funding towards this NatureTech. So clearly we're in the right direction. It's a great momentum to launch a NatureTech now, because in a couple of years they will kick off on the market. But it's just the funding will flow when people will identify there's the business model behind it.
Yes,
Just chipping in because time. We can say 5 minutes delay. I hope it's okay because we have very interesting questions.
Great. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one that we got is a tricky one. So from the perspective, it's Xavier. So from the perspective of a nature tech company trying to survive without compromising on its values, how can we feel empowered by taking investment from VCs that still orient 90% of their money to shale gas and big oil? So it's a good one, right? Anyone wants to take that one?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So I've worked in social impact, and this is funny that I'm going to answer this one. I worked in social impact and the nexus of impact and tech for, I said, 15 years right now at this point. And very early on, I realized that I've quickly been the most cynical in the room. When I'm in the room of ones that are not in the world of impact. They like to go to sessions and talk about the win-win and all this kind of BS, and you're like, right, okay, we know what you're going at. Storytelling is cute. The reality of the matter is that we're presently, this is my opinion alone, right? Not NTC or anything else. We're presently in a global world order which de-incentivizes doing the right thing when it comes to nature and social equity, and incentivizes a zero-sum game. Unless we're going to start a world revolution in 2 days, the only way that we could get towards the goals of 30-30 or whatever goals you have that are impact related is to work with the tools you have. And if taking money from investors, if working with oil and gas or mining is your path for making a lot more impact than the present state, I'm for it. I personally will take that money. I will personally put it into putting those investors out of business or transitioning them or whatever. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going to another COP. We're going to keep, meditating on how beautiful the world could be and not actually doing something about it. My personal takeaway.
I would only add one thing, one piece, one caveat though. Make sure that you understand what they want in return. So if they invest in you, and if they have 90% of investments in fields that are actually contradicting your goal, right? how far are they going to have impact on what you do, right? Ensure that even if you get investing from them, you're still able to go for the mission that you're on, that you don't need to compromise that, right? Just a little caveat on it.
Yeah, but we see many VCs, new generation, being very clear about the adversary impact of their actions, about the frameworks, about the ethics. And honestly, I see it's still a small part of total world financing, but we've got some people with very clear international intentionality funding new projects. So I think it's moving in the right direction. Thibauld, another question.
Maybe there is one that is directed directly to Marianne. So I'll ask this one. Do you think a taxonomy for nature tech is important? How can we relate with other finance and sustainability related taxonomies?
I think what is great is because we've seen what happened for climates, maybe we will mirror what already exists for nature. So we had the TCFD, which has been like the crown for most of the climate-related reporting. The TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, is becoming also like maybe interoperable with most of the frameworks. So CSRD will rely on the TNFD. The ISSB more globally already say that starting now until 2026, they will work on biodiversity requirements as well, based on the TNFD as well. So, which is good is we can see that we try not to reinvent the wheel, and we will try to learn and leverage what has been done for climate. So the taxonomy and try to explain like how to assess and not, have different targets or measures globally will be good. We can learn as well what has been done for finance. For example, SFDR has been there for a couple of years now. That will flow into the CSRD. There was like a lot of questions, like Simas say, do we have like one indicator for biodiversity, like we have a CO2 equivalent for carbon? It's complicated, like the aggregated indicator for biodiversity, like the MSA, for example, the mean species abundance. It's very difficult to tell a story with one indicator because biodiversity and nature are much more complex. And when we can see now in financial disclosure, it's more trying to address pressure. I invest in agriculture, I will focus on land use. I invest in energy intensive sectors, even data center. I will focus on climate change and resources, water resources, etc. So people will have a different approach, and I think we will learn a lot of what has been done for the last couple of years on finance and how to report and how to better assess biodiversity impact and biodiversity loss. And maybe we go forward, but clearly we can see that people are thinking now already about interoperability between the different frameworks.
Great, thank you. One or two more, let's try. So there is one on the IPLCs, which we didn't mention so far. So I think I'll take that one because it's also important. What do you see? How do you see the role of IPLCs and their ancestral knowledge in the design of nature tech and in the development of corporate biodiversity strategies? How do you ensure their full participation into the bridge between tech, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and tech, the real tech?
Just real quick, we did mention it. We did. And actually, in the taxonomy that we're working on, the knowledge, when we talk about tech, we consider that tech as well, right? From our perspective, for nature tech to truly scale, and this is a moonshot of ours, right? So feel free to take it and run with it, and don't even need to credit us for it. For nature tech to truly scale, again, it's not necessarily a technology problem, it's a human problem. And in this case, it's about logistics. We cite this example all the time. Often the big consultancies will say, yeah, the world, of nature tech is totally solved from a ground truthing perspective. It's called eDNA. Voila, we're done. But when you kind of like go into the details, you realize that there's certain countries that ban eDNA collection and you can't get the data samples out there, or how are you going to get consistent data samples in the middle of the Amazon, in a base? Are you going to send a consultant from San Francisco there every month? The reality is that for us to actually get any of this done, we need a global workforce, a global nature engineer workforce. Just as software ate the world that made Silicon Valley happen, nature tech, for it to be globally impactful, we need a global cadre of these engineers. And those are the frontline communities. Those are indigenous populations. I worked in the past, in my prior life, I started developing a project in Peru with the Shipibo people. And number one, it was them deciding on how and which technologies to use and all the rest. But number two, it's us relying on them for constant flow of data. And thankfully, this is where nature tech does play an incredible role. Aside from opening the opportunity for remuneration and respect, the transfer of funds could go in a much more transparent and seamless way through things like Web3 rails. And so you could literally have payment for services in real time coming back on the other line of the information flowing in. And there's actual projects being done in this space. Look no further than Rainforest Alliance, I believe, and Mosaic Earth, and a few other really great examples.
Great, thank you. One last question? Do we take time for one last question? Because there is one that collected a lot of votes from Emily. Is the focus on technology not a diversion to more from more profound and needed changes in business models?
So it's like, yes, diversion, keeping business as usual, continuing. Okay, Gilad. Who wants to take this question? Yeah, we talked a lot about tech, right? And there's deeper changes. A lot of people talk about decoupling from material inputs, degrowth, post-growth, and some would say, with technology, maybe just keep on pushing business as usual. What do you say about this?
Yeah, as a technologist, I can say that that's a delusion. Yeah, tech is not just like popping up and going to save the world. It is a tool, and it remains a tool, and it depends on the people who are using the tools, right? You can still use the best ESG data management or sustainability data management solution and still mess with it and use it for not taking action, right? And as Gilad mentioned, we have sources of gathering great data to take good action, but it still relies on, are you willing to, right? So I wouldn't simply rely on technology saving us at all. It is a tool, and we are accountable. We are responsible. We're responsible for developing the right tools in the right way, but we are also responsible for using them the way they're supposed to. And that is why I was referring to like values and ethics all the time, because like also we as technology providers and developers have a responsibility here when it comes to developing technology and even providing data that can be used in an ethical way. It is a bit abstract, but I think that's exactly what we need to double down on. Not just like putting technology out there and hope it will save the world. It won't, right? It's us. It's our responsibility.
Yeah, you're giving me, Steffen, the opportunity to give a quote from Rabelais, this famous French philosopher from the Renaissance, and it was in one of the slides at the beginning. Science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme, which is in English, science or technology without consciousness leads you nowhere. And so I think that's pretty much what we can all agree after this great speech. So yes, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was a great discussion. Hopefully it can be followed up by a lot of action in our respective jobs. And we'll be sharing this conference for a replay for all the people who could not attend.